Hello everyone, this is Michael Kong here,
This is Emiliano Esparza.
here to present to you Chapter 35, America and World War II.
Hey Michael, that's a pretty cool background you have
It's
there.
a real picture from the World War.
Really? Alright.
Okay, so the United States wanted to join the war because of being attacked by the Japanese at Pearl Harbor, and the US had to agree to the ABC-1 agreement, which is basically saying it wouldn't take immediate vengeance on Japan, would first focus on Germany so that Germany wouldn't be able to pick off the Allies one by one. The US needed time more than anything. Because they entered the war late, they had less time to prepare, and they're also racing the German scientists to build better, stronger weapons like atomic bombs. Now, the shock of war. So immigrant assimilation actually increased during this time as a lot of Germans and Italians supported the war effort. They joined as soldiers, right? Now, contrast with the First World War is that there is basically no witch hunting. This is what the book said of minority groups. Now, a big exception, obviously, is the Japanese internment, where there were 110,000 Japanese citizens taken from their homes and put into internment camps. 2/3 of these were actually born in the United States. They weren't associated with the homeland at all. The only culture they really knew was America, or American culture. Now, the wartime Supreme Court actually upheld the constitutionality of this until 1988, when Washington repaid them the $20,000 later. Here are some pictures of this time where the Japanese were taken. The Japanese, so in 1853, Commodore Perry went to Japan and inspired the Meiji government to start industrializing. And displaced 300,000 poor farmers. That's what industrialization basically does. It pushes away agriculture or minimizes it. And those farmers immigrated to the United States. Now, when they came to the United States, they took over a lot of the farming businesses as they were able to take advantage of new farming technology like irrigation. And you can see even today that farms like the Usagi farms that still exist today. Now, building the war machine. So the War Production Board responded really fast with increasing their output of weapons and ammunition, basically the more important materials, and stopping their production of less important materials like passenger cars for trains. They also developed better fertilizers and machines to harvest crops, I guess. Yeah, so you harvest. Because most of the farmers went to war. Now, you also have the War Labor Board, which fought the increase in minimum wage. That was basically going against the labor unions who wanted to increase minimum wage and who would organize strikes and walkouts. I also have the Smith-Connolly Anti-Strike Act, which is enacted as a response to labor union activity. There are 3 parts to this. The government could seize and operate industries and strike. The strikes against government-owned industry was made illegal, and the government was able to take control of all the coal mines and railroads. They're basically trying to make labor union activity illegal. Now, you also have manpower and woman power. So in terms of non-combat duties, there are around 200,000 women who took nursing and medical jobs on the front lines. But even more so, there are 6 million women that served in manufacturing, and around $4 trillion of wartime equipment was produced in the United States, and women were a big part of that. Now, as for the farms that were left behind by the farmers that left to fight, the United States started the Bracero program. In 1942, thousands of Mexican workers came to harvest the fruit and grain in the West, and most actually stayed and became a cornerstone of agriculture in the West. Now, here are some of the ways that women served in the military. You have the WACs in the Army, the WAVES in the Navy, and the SPARs in the Coast Guard. As for migrations, the main thing here is to know that large cities like New York and Los Angeles grew exponentially, and other big cities obviously too, as they had a lot of jobs like factories and shipyards. And also many people of color began to move to major cities in the East and West, not really much in the middle area of the United States, as they were searching for better jobs. Now, as for holding the home front, American home front was not as messed up as the European home front because most of the fighting was going on in Europe. Not really any fighting was going on in America. But Americans were affected through water rationing and sugar rationing and other vital resource curfews and rationing, all that kind of stuff. And the book did say that the war cured the Great Depression as it stimulated industry, and it wasn't really the New Deal. A lot of people think that the New Deal was what cured the Great Depression, but not really. As for the effects of the war, economically, income taxes rose, the GNP grew, increased. Private businesses also grew, and obviously the debt increased. World War II cost around $10 million an hour, or $330 billion total. As you can see in the graph, during the wartime, the GDP was much higher than it was before, and it actually sunk afterwards. Now, socially, there were more government-supported housing and daycares for workers, and as you can see with Macy's in New York, the American consumer culture was starting to develop. For the rising sun of the Pacific, some claim that World War II was actually started back in 1931 when the Japanese invaded Manchuria. Now, after the Meiji government started their industrialization, the Japanese had assembled a powerful military empire, and they wanted to show this off. And the Japanese Empire attacked the United States because they saw the US as the only thing in the way of complete dominance of the Pacific, which led them to attack Pearl Harbor.
Alright, so we're going to talk about Japan's high tide at Midway. Now, this is one of the most decisive battles of World War II, where it was over the small Midway Island. It was supposed to be a crushing defeat for the Americans and a total surprise attack, but the Japanese, their signals were intercepted by the Office of Naval Intelligence, and it allowed a fleet to be scrambled to actually defend the islands. And it was a major turning point in the war in the Pacific because an entire Japanese fleet was destroyed. Up to 3 aircraft carriers were lost, and the Japanese Navy was really never the same after that. It also ended the myth of Japanese naval superiority, where no other sea-bearing country could defeat them in terms of naval power. Now, the American strategy to beat the Japanese was called island hopping. Now, this was a very bloody, very costly military strategy where every island that had a Japanese outpost on it of any kind was attacked, invaded, and the outpost was destroyed, and the Japanese defenders were kicked off. Now, this was very bloody because tiny islands with very harsh terrain like jungles were fought by American Marines, and thousands of lives were lost for literal yards of space. And the battles would take weeks to months and very, very predominantly slow down the actual pace of the war. Now, the Allies did a good job of halting Hitler. In the early part of the war, it seemed that Hitler's army was unstoppable. They smashed right through many countries, such as Belgium and Poland, that were known to have a sizable military, though not comparable of Germany's, but they did so with such ferocity it only took a matter of days. Now, the first way that Hitler was stopped was in his invasion of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union did the major portion of fighting and dying when it came to the European theater, where over 30 million civilians and soldiers in the Soviet Union died in order to stop Hitler. Also, the Western Allies did their part, not only by imposing economic sanctions on Hitler, but also by invading North Africa. And the invasion of North Africa served to cut off Hitler's oil supply, but also to kick out Hitler and Mussolini from North Africa and serve as an invasion point to Italy. Now, Italy was an Axis power run by Benito Mussolini, and the United States and the Western Allies moved in through North Africa and invaded through Italy, through the island of Sicily. Now, the invasion of Italy went very well in the opening months, but the invasion was bogged down near the northern border into Europe because of heavy fighting and very mountainous terrain that stopped a lot of the major advances. This all culminated in D-Day, which was June 9th, 1944, where the key invasion that opened up that second front in Europe that Stalin wanted began, where Operation Overlord invaded the Normandy region of France. Now, this consisted of 5 main beaches: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. Now, the first part of fighting that was done by American and British paratroopers that were there to secure bridges and key infrastructure to kind of stop a German counteroffensive so that they could gain a foothold on the beaches. Now, at home, there was a lot of political trouble because FDR was elected for his 4th term against Dewey. Now, what this showed is that FDR For one, it's now a constitutional amendment that no president may serve longer than 2 terms, but it also showed the amount of power that FDR had at the time and the admiration of the public, where he was able to actually win 4 terms. There was also some controversy behind his vice president. His vice president was supposed to be Henry Wallace, who had been his vice president for the last 3 terms, but the party believed that Harry S. Truman would be better because of Wallace's unpopular opinions towards African Americans and a very progressive nature. The last days of Hitler were marred with extreme sadness. The Fuhrer was very depressed and believed most of his generals, who at the time he had executed, believed that it was at their fault that his strategies were not executed in a way that allowed for victory. Now, the last time he was seen actually in public was to command a battalion of child soldiers that were supposed to defend the Reichstag, which is a bunker that he actually lived in and committed suicide in at the end of the war. Now, Japan, they died very hard. They'd been kicked off of each one of their colonial possessions, and what that caused is a domino effect where Japan was only confined to its major home islands. However, an invasion of Japan was not tenable because it would cost millions of men and hundreds of thousands of civilian lives. Now, at this time, it's important to note that Japan lied in ruin because of strategic bombing on the part of the United States. Many of its major cities were actually destroyed. The atomic bombs. The atomic bombs were used supposedly to end the war, but many historians now believe that the atomic bombs were not the final shots of the World War II, but actually the first shots of the Cold War. It was believed that Harry Truman thought that the atomic bombings would show the newly powerful Soviet Union that the United States was not willing to be trampled underfoot, and neither were the Western Allies, that they were power and that they could use them for bargaining chips both now and for deciding the spheres of influence in ruined Europe. The Allies, as we all know, were triumphant. We don't speak German, we speak English, or American, as I like to say.
You speak American.
I speak American. So what happened was, as we all know, the strategies worked, but hundreds of thousands of soldiers in the U.S. died, and over 60 million people died in the entire conflict. And pretty much all of Europe and Japan were destroyed. Millions of Soviets were dead, but the Allies did prevail. Alright guys, that wraps it up for our video.
Thanks for watching, and sorry for talking so fast. He has to catch a bus now.
How dare you, Michael?